Welcome to Alice Just Alice 55. You're listening to an AI narrated audiobook of my original work, The Child the Sea Kept, written by Alice N. Smith. The chapter playlist is linked in the description below. Now let's begin. Chapter 8, Age 15, The Mutiny That Wasn't. The quartermaster believed mutiny began as arithmetic, not speeches, not drawn blades. Those came later, if a captain was careless or a crew was hungry enough. Mutiny began smaller, a missing share, a thin ration, a prize that cost more blood than coin. One man decided he had been cheated, then found two others willing to listen. The quartermaster kept the ship's accounts, but numbers were the easy part. Coin could be counted, powder weighed, water marked by the barrel. Men were harder. Men lied about what they were owed, what they feared, and how close they were to doing something stupid. The trick was to catch the stupidity before it found friends. The ship had taken a poor prize 3 days before, a fishing vessel with more stink than silver and salted cod going bad in the hold. The captain had let the fishermen keep their boat, mostly because sinking it would have wasted shot, and towing it would have wasted patience. The crew had grumbled. Pirates preferred coin to mercy. Since then, the quartermaster had been watching the ship sour. He saw it in meals that went too quiet, dice games where laughter died too fast, and old grievances returning with sharper teeth. By noon, 3 men had begun standing too close together whenever work slowed. One strong and proud enough to be stupid, one loud over lost coin, and one clever enough to keep his hands clean. The quartermaster noticed. So did Eva. That irritated him more than it should have. Eva was 15 now, lean, steady, and too precise to be mistaken for the half-drowned child the quartermaster still sometimes saw when he looked too quickly. The crew had changed around her, though not cleanly. Some men still crossed themselves when she watched the weather too long, while others brought her broken knots, disputed tallies, and questions disguised as complaints. A few resented that. The quartermaster understood resentment. It was one of the ship's most reliable currencies. That afternoon, he found her near the water casks, listening to 2 sailors argue over a missing measure of rum. She stood just outside the quarrel until men forgot she was there, then knew more than anyone had meant to reveal. One sailor jabbed a finger into the other's chest. "You took it." The second slapped his hand away. "Say that again." The first man leaned in. "You took it." The quartermaster started toward them, but Eva moved first. She did not step between the men. That would have been foolish. Instead, she lifted the small tally board from the cask beside her and turned it over. A chalk mark had been smudged and rewritten badly. She studied it for one breath, then reached out and plucked a bit of white chalk dust from the first sailor's cuff. Both sailors went still. The second man stared. "You marked it wrong?" The first sailor's face darkened. "It was an error." Eva said nothing. The quartermaster arrived then, because silence could expose a lie but not punish it. He took the tally board from Eva, looked at the mark, looked at the cuff, and then at the sailor. "An error that favored your thirst." The man opened his mouth. The quartermaster said, "Choose your next words by whether you want to keep your teeth." The sailor closed his mouth. "Half ration for 3 days," the quartermaster said. "The missing measure comes from yours." The second sailor smirked. The quartermaster turned on him. "And you will scrub the casks for letting yourself nearly be baited into a fight over arithmetic." The smirk died. Eva had already looked away. That too irritated him. She did not wait to be thanked. She did not look pleased. She simply watched the deck where tension had been and seemed to measure whether it would return. The quartermaster lowered his voice. "You could have brought that to me." Eva looked at the sailors moving off in opposite directions. "You came." "I came because men were about to bleed over rum," the quartermaster said. Eva looked toward the sailors moving off in opposite directions. "Yes." The quartermaster studied her. "That is not an answer." Eva glanced at him, and for one flicker of a moment he thought she might have been amused. It became one. Then she walked away. By supper, the ship had grown worse. Thomas served thin stew. Brig cursed over a cracked gun carriage. Silas tied red thread around his wrist because the air smelled argumentative, and Ansel moved quietly through the crew, listening where men forgot to guard their tongues. The captain remained in his cabin over captured charts, and his absence made room for talk. The quartermaster disliked room. Empty space invited men to fill it badly. Near the galley the three men gathered again. The broad one spoke first, low but not low enough. The one who had lost coin answered. The clever one listened, eyes moving over the deck to count who might be close enough to hear. The quartermaster considered ending it there with a hard word, a public reprimand, or a fist if necessary. But grievances forced too soon sometimes rooted deeper. A man dragged from a corner became a martyr if enough fools thought he had been dragged unfairly. Better to know how many were listening before cutting the rope. Then Eva walked into the middle of the deck carrying a folded strip of paper. The quartermaster's eyes narrowed. She went first to Tomas, who stood just outside the galley wiping his hands on a cloth. Eva handed him the paper. Tomas read it, frowned, then looked toward the sailor who had lost coin. A moment later, Tomas called across the deck, "You, I found the debt you keep whining about. You marked the wrong man." The sailor stiffened. "What?" Thomas waved the paper. "You lost coin to the boy with the scar over his ear, not the man you've been accusing. If you are going to bankrupt yourself, at least do it accurately." Several men laughed, not kindly, but laughter broke the shape of the corner. The accused sailor swore and demanded to see the paper. Thomas shoved it at him. Two others leaned in. The clever one withdrew slightly, annoyed by attention he had not chosen. The broad one looked confused, which was his most natural expression. The quartermaster looked toward Eva, but she was already gone from the center of the deck. He found her near the stairs, watching Brig stop the broad sailor with a shout about hauling damaged wood from the gun deck. "You there," Brig barked. "If you have enough strength to stand idle and look mutinous, you have enough strength to carry something useful." The broad sailor flushed. "I wasn't," Brig pointed. "Argue and I will find heavier wood." The man went. That left the clever one alone. No corner, no audience, no grievance fat enough to feed. The quartermaster felt the ship shift around him. Not physically, something subtler, a pressure lessening before most men knew it had gathered. He looked at Eva. She looked back, and for the first time in years the quartermaster wondered if she had expected him to notice. The quartermaster crossed to Eva. "What was on that paper?" "A tally," Eva said. The quartermaster narrowed his eyes. "From where?" "Tomas keeps bad accounts," Eva said. Thomas keeps excellent accounts when food is involved, the quartermaster said. Eva looked toward the galley. He keeps secret accounts when men gamble near his galley. The quartermaster stared at her. Of course Thomas kept secret accounts. The quartermaster should have known. Cooks heard everything. Men confessed more over food than under threat, mostly because hunger made them careless and warmth made them soft. And brig? The quartermaster asked. Eva looked toward the gun deck. The broken carriage needed carrying. The quartermaster looked toward the gun deck. Did it? Yes, Eva said. His eyes narrowed. Did it need him? Eva watched the broad sailor disappear below, with Brig's curses following him. He needed weight. The quartermaster nearly smiled and disliked himself for it. You are separating them, he said. Eva said nothing. Do not play dull with me, the quartermaster said. You are bad at it. That was not true. She was very good at it, but sometimes lies were useful tools if one used them on purpose. Eva looked toward the deck where the clever sailor now stood alone, too still to seem innocent. He listens before others speak. The quartermaster followed her gaze. Yes. He does not begin fires, Eva said. No, the quartermaster said. He waits to see which ones are worth warming his hands over. Eva nodded once. The quartermaster felt cold, despite the heat of the evening. How long have you been watching him? Since breakfast, Eva said. Only since breakfast, he thought. That ought to have comforted him. It did not. What did you see? The quartermaster asked. Eva took a moment before answering. He smiles when other men complain, not when they joke, only when they complain. The quartermaster looked again at the clever sailor. There were many kinds of hunger aboard a ship. Some men wanted coin, some wanted revenge, some wanted authority without responsibility. The clever one, he realized, did not want to lead a mutiny. Not yet. He wanted one to become possible. A dangerous man, then. The quartermaster turned back to Eva. You should have brought this to me. Eva said, you were watching too. The answer struck him harder than accusation would have, because it was true. He had seen the pattern and waited to measure it. Eva had seen the same pattern and begun moving pieces before the board was named. You are interfering in ship discipline, the quartermaster said. Eva's gaze moved to him. Yes, the quartermaster's jaw tightened. That is my work. Yes, Eva said, and the captain's, the quartermaster said. Eva held his gaze. Yes, the quartermaster stepped closer. Not yours. Eva looked toward the deck. The young sailor from the rope lesson stood nearby, listening despite pretending not to. When he saw Eva's eyes on him, he straightened and returned very suddenly to his work. Eva said, "It was becoming everyone's." The quartermaster did not answer. Aboard this ship, discipline passed through him. Eva had no right to move men like pieces on a chart. She held no rank. She commanded no watch. She was 15 and still too young for half the judgments she had already learned to make. And yet the ship had been calmer for her interference. That was the part he hated. A shout rose near the foremast. The clever sailor had cornered the young deckhand, with one hand on his shoulder and his head bent low, speaking softly enough to look harmless. The boy's face said otherwise. The quartermaster moved, but Eva touched his sleeve. He stopped, more from surprise than obedience. She did not look at him. Her eyes were on Silas, who stood nearby pretending to inspect a knot that did not need inspecting. "Silas!" Eva called, not loudly. Silas turned at once. So did half the deck. Eva pointed to the young deckhand's coil of rope. Wrong side. Silas looked down, then at the boy, then at the clever sailor's hand on the boy's shoulder. Understanding moved across his face with unusual speed. Wrong side? Silas said, scandalized. That is how men anger rope. You want weather? That is how you get weather. He bustled over and inserted himself between the young deckhand and the clever sailor with the shamelessness of a man protected by superstition. Move! Move! Let me see! No wonder the air feels sour. The clever sailor stepped back, unable to object without revealing he had been interrupted. The young deckhand looked relieved. The quartermaster stared. It had taken 4 words. Silas turned the rope over, muttering nonsense about knots holding grudges. Men nearby laughed. The clever sailor smiled too, but this time it was thin and empty. The quartermaster leaned closer to Eva. You used Silas. Eva watched Silas continue his performance. He likes being useful. He likes being dramatic, the quartermaster said. Eva watched Silas fuss over the knot. Yes, the quartermaster looked at her sharply. This time he was certain she had meant it as humor. Before he could answer, the captain appeared at the top of the quarterdeck steps. His gaze moved over the deck, taking in the scattered men, Thomas folding a paper into his apron, Briggs shouting below, Silas preaching to a knot, the clever sailor alone, the quartermaster standing beside Eva. The captain descended slowly. Report. The quartermaster kept his eyes on the crew. Discontent. I know that part, the captain said. Not yet mutiny, the quartermaster said. I know that too, the captain said. The quartermaster glanced at him. Then why ask? To see whether you would say it, the captain said. The quartermaster's jaw tightened. The captain looked at Eva. And you? Eva watched the scattered crew. Men were too close. The captain's face did not change, but the quartermaster saw the words land. Men were too close. That was as clean a description of early mutiny as any he had heard. Not angry, not armed, not even decided. Just too close. Close enough for grievance to pass from one mouth to another. Close enough for a clever man to discover whether others were ready to be foolish on his behalf. The captain looked toward the clever sailor. Who? The quartermaster answered before Eva could. Him. The captain nodded once. Proof? Not enough for punishment, the quartermaster said. Enough for work. Then give him some, the captain said. The quartermaster allowed himself one grim breath of satisfaction. Aye. He crossed the deck and stopped before the clever sailor. The clever sailor looked up with quick, false innocence. Quartermaster? The quartermaster stopped in front of him. You will take 2 men and inspect the bilge pumps. The sailor's expression tightened before he hit it. Now? No, the quartermaster said. Last Tuesday. I enjoy speaking to the past. A few nearby sailors looked away to hide their smiles. The clever sailor said, That work was done yesterday. Then you will enjoy finding it familiar, the quartermaster said. The sailor's mouth flattened. For how long? Until I no longer dislike looking at you, the quartermaster said. The man held his gaze half a breath too long. The quartermaster smiled. That solved the matter. The sailor looked away first. I. Take no one you have spoken with today, the quartermaster added. I dislike repeating myself and may start charging for it. The man went, anger stiff in his shoulders. When the quartermaster returned, the captain said, "Well handled." The quartermaster did not know which of them he meant. That irritated him too. "Not finished," the quartermaster said. "It will come back if the next prize is poor." "Most things do," the captain said. Eva watched the stairs where the clever sailor had gone. "He will wait." The quartermaster folded his arms. "Yes." "Will you?" Eva asked. The question was directed at the captain, but the quartermaster felt it strike him as well. The captain looked at Eva for a long moment. "No." The quartermaster's eyes narrowed. "What does that mean?" "It means," the captain said, "that we do not sail where hungry men expect us to sail." The quartermaster understood. "You found something in the charts." "A convoy route," the captain said. "Risky." The quartermaster glanced toward the crew. "All coin is risky." "More than usual," the captain said. The quartermaster looked at the crew, at the faces too lean with disappointment, at the men still laughing too loudly around Silas, at Thomas watching from the galley door, at Brig emerging from below covered in sawdust and bad temper. A hungry crew was danger. A rich prize was danger. Sailing away from opportunity was danger too. Command, he thought bitterly, was mostly choosing which knife deserved your back. He looked at Eva. She was watching the crew, not the captain. Watching who listened, who pretended not to, who had relaxed and who had merely gone still. The quartermaster said, "She should not be doing this." The captain followed his gaze. No, that answer surprised him. The captain continued quieter, "But she is." Eva heard. Of course she heard. Her expression did not change. The quartermaster stepped closer to the captain. "You understand what you are making?" The captain's eyes remained on the deck. "No." It was an honest answer, and the quartermaster hated honest answers when they offered no comfort. He looked at Eva again and felt the old unease settle into a new shape. Men had feared her as an omen, protected her as the captain's charge, and resented her when she proved right. Now she had begun moving them without permission, and the worst of it was how well she had done it. The captain commanded like weather. Men saw him coming. Eva was different. Eva changed the wind before men knew they had turned. That evening the ship did not mutiny. No one would call it that, of course. They would say tempers had been high, poor prizes made poor moods, and the quartermaster had put men to work before idleness spoiled them. Perhaps some of that was true. After sunset, the quartermaster watched Eva pass among the crew with a coil of repaired line over one shoulder. Men noticed her. Fewer moved away now. More watched to see where she would go. The quartermaster looked toward the captain, who stood near the rail, watching her too. Neither man spoke. There was nothing to say that would not sound too much like worry. Above them, the sails filled with night wind. Below them, the ship carried its hunger, its rumors, its debts, and its fragile obedience into dark water. The quartermaster had spent his life keeping men from becoming worse than they already were. He had thought that meant force, ration, punishment, and the occasional well-timed threat. Now he was no longer certain. Sometimes a mutiny was stopped by command, sometimes by fear, sometimes by better food, and sometimes by a quiet girl who knew which men were standing too close together. Thank you for listening to Chapter 8 of The Child the Sea Kept. If you'd like to continue the story, the chapter playlist is linked in the description below. I'll see you in the next chapter.